Oh my God, David Perel is here. Oh, guys, hi, David. Oh, those are money, real money, really? Thank you, mate. Wow, I owe you a beer then. Next time we meet on the track, we get a beer together. Guys, make sure to go and subscribe to David Perel's YouTube channel because not only is a great guy, but he posts some amazing videos where he's actually coaching and let you know, and there's tons of stuff that you can learn on the mentality and the approach of a real pro driver on the car and on the track. I mean, I'm looking at his channel and his videos, and I'm like, yeah, that's the difference. That's the difference between an amateur driver and a pro driver. Not even an amateur, but an amateur, sim racer, and a pro real driver. The amount of focus, concentration they have, how they can manage situations. You can learn so much from his channel. So go there, subscribe, and make sure to watch his videos. All right, so let's see, what else do we have? Okay, so let's move to the telemetry. Um, to the telemetry. So let's see if you guys can check this. I believe you can. Right. Okay, here we have our lap times. Again, I will post the forum thread on how to set up the telemetry, the MoTeC telemetry for Assetto Corsa Competizione on the description of the video tomorrow when the video will be available to watch it after the live. So go to the link, read about it. If you have questions, ask in the forums. The community is there to help you. We are developers there to help you, so don't worry about it. Okay, so um, right, so you see the first lap here. Uh, first of all, the motor telemetry, we don't only provide compatibility with the MoTeC program, which is, as you know, the best telemetry in the world, but we also uh, created a template which has specific channels. Now, I know for the best of you that you are very experienced, we don't show all the channels, and it is something that we decided to do so for two reasons. First one is obviously we have been granted with official data in many cars, amazing support of all the teams and manufacturers and engineers and drivers. I mean, there are guys that really help us to bring you the best possible simulation that we were able to do. So we yeah, full screen. Sorry about that. So we couldn't and we didn't want to show you um, the all the channels possible available. Sorry about that. You know how it is. The second reason, which is as well as important, is that we are giving you more or less the same channels that the real telemetrists in the real cars use for driver training and setup driving and driver input and discussion of problems and everything. So usually when the driver comes back and wants to talk with the engineer, many teams, most of the teams, some of it, but um, they have um, they are using this kind of channels. They don't use all the available channels in the disposition, which are not too much because we're not talking about uh, official cars there. They are pretty much all client cars. Uh, but especially when they have to talk with the driver, those are the channels more or less that they're using. And this kind of template is made by an actual telemetrist on a real car. He made it for us. He explained us how they use it. So here it is. All right. So um, what do we have here? This is one of the pages of the MoTeC template, which shows you histograms, histograms, not Instagram, histograms, right? Okay, sorry about my English, of the suspension movements and speed in bump and rebound. Okay, so what you have here horizontally is um, the um, the speed of the piston, right? The speed of the piston. So yes. Obviously, I'm reading a question here. So sorry about the pronunciation of your nickname. Zune, maybe. Sorry about that, mate. Asks, are the dampers histograms still useful in 20 hertz? Because Assetto Corsa Competizione, at least for now, exports in 20 hertz of resolution of the data. Yes, you can do much more in a higher resolution, but you can still work at 20 hertz and have an idea. Again, we're not talking about minute work here. I'm sure that professional people will ask for much more. We will try to make it happen. But even at 20, you can have a general idea and have an idea if what you're doing works and why it works and how it works. Okay. So what do we get here is the part where the color is more saturated. So for example here, I hope you guys can see my mouse. I'm not sure if it's visible. Yes, I think so. So the part here is the slow speed. What does that mean? It doesn't have anything to do with the actual speed of the car. It has to do with the speed of the piston inside the damper. So how fast, the suspension moves up and down, up and down. Okay, and slow speed is um, is happening when the car transitions from one state to another. So when you are getting accelerations in the car. So when the car turns, so you have lateral acceleration changing. So you go from zero if you are in the straight, you turn, and you have lateral acceleration, and the car rolls. Okay, when the car rolls because you are just turning, okay, and the piston moves, this is a slow movement. It's not a fast movement. And you can see this here in the middle section when you have this kind of graph, a bell kind of graph. Um, uh, the same happens if you are braking or accelerating. The car pitches forward or backwards, okay? Squats backwards, the rake changes, the body changes like that. And again, this is a slow movement of the suspension, and you can see it here. Now, when you get bumps or curbs, or stuff like that, problems in the asphalt, then the suspension gets instant hits and moves very fast up and down because it compresses fastly because of a curb. For example, you get a curb and pump instantly goes up, and then it gets so much energy it has to get down again and maybe oscillate a little bit. All those suspension movements are the fast suspension movements, fast speed. It moves up and down very fast. The speed is very sorry about that. Let me get some water. It pays, you know. Hmm. Yeah, much better. So, uh, so as I was saying, this is a very fast movement of the suspension. Okay. So you see the fast movements outside where the color is not so saturated. So from the left side is rebound, and from the right side is bump. Okay. All right. So um, what does histograms tells us? Right. So the first thing that tells you is that if the histogram is moved towards the left or the right part of the graph and it's not decently symmetrical, okay, That means that your dampers are either sorry about that. Your dampers are either way too stiff in bump or in rebound. Okay. So, for example, uh, in this example, this is what we did with the aggressive setup. And in the aggressive setup, if you remember, and maybe I can show you later, uh, at the front, we had a stiffer slow rebound. Okay, stiffer slow rebound and softer slow bump. Now, the histogram shows us exactly this. If you see here, the peak, you can see it better on the right front suspension. The center of the curve is a little bit more high towards the bump. Why? Because the bump was softer, it means that it lets the suspension move more in bump, so it compresses more in bump than it extends in rebound. So we had a stiffer rebound here and a bit of a softer bump here, and you can see that already in the graph. The graph in bump is higher and the graph in rebound is lower. So rule of thumb, again, means nothing at all. But if you want your graph to be, you know, decent, you have to try to be symmetrical left and right. It's true that you can have. It's true that you can have a little bit of asymmetrical dampers. You know, softer bump or stiffer bump than rebound. It's not actually. Sometimes you need to do it, but if you see a histogram where you have, for example, the bump that is so high here at the end of the slow section, that's, you know, that's an indication of that something doesn't work very well. Okay, so probably you have to do something about it. And we have this kind of indication at the rear here, because as you can see at the rear, the curve is very flat. Actually, it's even lower at the center, which means that our dampers were a little bit too soft at the rear, and they were. If we're gonna check the setup again, we'll see that at the rear we had something like 15 as a value, 10 to 15 as a value at the rear dampers, and that shows into our histograms. It is a tiny bit higher um, at the extremes of the slow section and even lower at the center of the slow section. This is an indication that maybe you need a little bit higher, a little bit stiffer dampers. Okay, so let's see what happened in the other lap times we did. So let's go and get which one? This one. This one. Now you see, this is the very soft lap we did. This is the lap with the very soft dampers. See the difference. So this is the aggressive setup, especially at the front, and this is again the soft setup. See how, it goes down. It goes down because the piston starts to move faster because the dampers are softer, so they let the suspension to move faster, you know. And again, I remind you, dump, stiff damping, slow movement. Okay, do you remember this? Stiff damping, slow movement in the honey. Soft damping, much faster movement in the water. Okay, now you start to realize what we were saying at the start uh, of this live stream. And let's go get the very stiff um, setup. So here's the very stiff setup. Now you can see at the back how the setup became, higher in the middle. Look at this. Look at this again. See how the rear damper is low and now it is higher. It creates this kind of effect right here. Now, the same happens also in the fast damping again. So, soft dampers, you can see the fast damping that keeps letting the damper working at very high speeds. So the farther we move away from the center of the graph, okay, the farther we move away from the center of the graph, also especially at the rear, look at that. The farther we move away from the center of the graph, the faster the piston and the suspension moves up and down. And we see here that we still have, movement in this kind of very, very fast suspension movement. While if I choose the very stiff, you see the difference? It's quite a bit of a difference. You see how it goes down here, it stays very, very low at the very high speeds. So that means that the stiffer damper doesn't let the suspension to move at very high speeds. It controls the movement, it controls the oscillation, it keeps the speed of the suspension movement at slower values. Okay, so um, let me check the. I know that this kind of stuff is starts to be complicated. Believe me, I have issues myself, so don't worry about it. Ask things. Let's see at the chat what you're saying, and let's see if I can reply on some of your questions. So, um, Dave Zelink, Dave Zelink, sorry, asks, is the low high speed boundary always the same for dampers, 25 millimeters at second? No, no, it isn't. Actually, the great difference of Assetto Corsa Competizione with all the other sims that we have done until now is that instead of having a kink in the damper speed, where you know uh, until a damper speed you have a specific stiffness of the damper. In all the other sims that we have done until now, and some other sims, I don't know the most recent ones what they do, but older sims, uh, you had a fixed stiffness of the damper up to a speed of the piston, and then when that speed was faster, instantly you had a different stiffness. That was the difference between slow damping and fast damping, but it was a specific speed that it would change. In Assetto Corsa Competizione, you have something like this that I want to show you now. Let me show you this thing. Let me get this and see how I can show you that for a minute. So where is it? Oops. Okay, let's go here and here. Oops. Here. So in Assetto Corsa Competizione, we input big lookup tables that get this kind of graph. Those are the dampers inside Assetto Corsa Competizione. They can get even more complicated than this. And as you can see, the kink, as they say, so the change in stiffness varies a lot from click to click. So it's one graph of that is a click into the setup screen. So for each click, you get different speeds, different stiffness, even completely different curves. So the curve is completely different here than here. So each click is completely different. That's why it gets so difficult to understand what they are doing. And those graphs that I show you are from real dampers, and those are the graphs that we're putting inside the Assetto Corsa Competizione. So let's get back again to MoTeC. Sorry about that. Should be here. All right. Okay, so let's see another question. So thanks for the congratulations and everything. So Celtic Pharaoh asks, does stiffer wheel rates lead to higher zero beam? You mean the how the graph is behaved? Yes, obviously. Yeah, because different springs and stiffness create different oscillations, and as such, different suspension movements. So you're gonna have differences. So I would recommend to do your testing with the same stiffness. Uh, Personally, I change the dampers uh, after the whole setup is made. I start with, for example, you can start with the aggressive setup, do the whole setup, spring stiffness, wheel rates, bump stop stiffness, which is another spring. Do everything you want. When you are satisfied and you want to start fine tuning, you want to change things in a more detailed way, which means also that you understand your car better, then go to the dampers and don't change the spring stiffness again, or at least until you play with the dampers. This means that every time you change the damping, you're gonna have um, histograms that you can compare, because that's the situation. Uh, it doesn't tells a lot the actual values of of the histogram, but the possibility to compare. For example, you can also activate both laps like this. Now we have two laps at the same time into the histograms, and we can compare one lap, which are the red color, and the other lap, which is all the gray color, and see the differences between them with all the rest of the setup the same. So here you can see the exact differences between stiff dampers and very, very stiff dampers, for example. So yeah, this is how it works, for example. Okay, so this gives you an idea on, you can check and see if you have some big issues with the dampers, or at least uh, do some comparison between one setup and another, and have an idea of how your suspension movement works. All right, so looking for questions, but there are some questions that go out of what we're talking about now. So okay, we have an idea, but how can we understand if the actual driving and behavior of the car and grip works well with one setup or the other? Because here we just have a look at what the suspension speed is, but it doesn't really tell us. I mean, we can find bad patterns and correct them, bad issues, if we see that the graph is very asymmetrical. We can correct it if we see that the graph is very flat or strange, has strange curves as before. But it doesn't really tell us, okay, but am I gaining lap time or am I losing lap time? It doesn't tell us much of that, or at least I cannot read such stuff in here, so I can explain you. So what can we do? Right, we can do something pretty interesting. We can go into the um, suspension travel um, template, because as you see we have, sorry, work, how is it called? I don't remember those tabs. They are called whatever, the tab that says susp theory, suspension travel. All right, we can go here, and we can try and check uh, a couple of turns that we know that the car has issues, or the circuit, for example, is very bumpy at Brands Hatch. So let's get the very soft lap time here, okay, and the very stiff lap time, and see what's going on. So this is the turn one, okay, turn two, the very slow turn, turn three, and now this here, where I'm going to, zoom like that. Now this is the turn four, which is the pretty long left-hander that you are going, up, and at the exit you also have a very big bump. This is the turn that leads to the back straight, okay, of Brands Hatch. So this is the one, and I'm going to um, uh, zoom in here. Let's see if I can zoom a little bit like that. Okay, so as you can see, yes, the frequency is not so nice, but here's something you can do. You can right click on a channel, put some filtering, just one sample is enough, and there you have it. Very nice filtered suspension movement. So uh, here's the situation. Now let's move in distance, not in lap time, but in distance. So just to be sure, yes, the white line is the soft setup, while um, the azure blue line is the very stiff setup. And you can see here the suspension travel. Okay, this is the suspension travel of the rear right uh, suspension, which is the external one and the one that gets the biggest, bump from this nasty bump at the exit of the turn. So what we can observe here. So if you look at what is happening exactly here at the exit, okay, or maybe here, which is another bump, you see something pretty interesting. So let's check this one first. So um, let me zoom into this sector here. Okay. So as I said, the blue line is the very stiff setup, and you can see that the stiff setup here doesn't oscillate. It goes through the bumps, oscillates a tiny bit, so you can be certain that the suspension absorbs a little bit, of course, the bumps, but doesn't oscillate a lot. Either the suspension or the body. It keeps, the car follows the rod, but the suspension doesn't oscillate a lot. And you can see how different it is here. You see, there is a big difference in oscillation. Here is, if we can bring our cursor here, so the car with the soft setup goes down to 14, while this is millimeters of suspension movement from the zero. So it goes down a lot close to the zero here, while the blue one goes 28. You see 28 here, which is the wider extension that we have. And then again, when it goes up in compression, you can see here what a big compression it does the soft setup, while the stiff setup on the blue line, it doesn't even goes up. It goes up much later, much later. So the soft suspension does something like that, boing. Okay, you can see it again on the graph, boing, like this. While the stiff setup is much more controlled. It's just like whoop, it's a whoop like this. It's goes down a little bit, and then very, very slowly goes up, doesn't even oscillate at all. So here you can have a very clear indication that the two suspensions act completely differently on the bumps. Now, is this enough to help us understand if one is better than the other? Not yet. So now we will go into the tab that says wheel speed, right? And we will go on to, again, at the rear of the car in the same situation. Okay, let's hide the inner wheel here, although it would be a nice indication. And let's filter again the wheel speed of the rear. So here's an interesting situation. That's very interesting. So the rear of the soft setup, again, soft setup is the white, okay, while blue graph is the stiff setup. So the soft setup even goes down in wheel speed, right? Uh, while the the stiff setup stays the same. It even goes a little bit higher. Okay. Now, especially we can see what happens with the throttle here. Okay. Again, let's hide the brake. So you can see that um, when I'm on the throttle, the yellow goes up. The stiff setup goes up, while the uh, the soft setup is much more smooth. Now that's an interesting indication uh, because it shows you that possibly the stiff setup has some wheel spin. Okay, and maybe we can also activate the other wheel, which is the inner wheel, and we can see. Let's filter this too. So now we have the two rear wheels. Okay. Now again, uh, the colored magenta graph is the stiff setup. The white one is the soft setup. So the soft setup doesn't gain any speed, while we can see clearly that the stiff setup wheel spins. The inner wheel gets another bump and wheel spins. So we have wheel spin. And why we have wheel spin? Because because the suspension is so stiff that doesn't absorb well the bump. So instead of absorbing the bump and letting the wheel keeps its grip, it jumps or almost jumps, and that generates a tiny bit of wheel spin. Now, how much is this wheel spin? Is it really that bad? Well, it depends, let's have a look here. Sorry, I can't see down here. So the wheel spin happens from here to here, more or less. Okay. And if we see down here, it's almost 1/10 and a half, 150 milliseconds of a second. It's 1/10, more than 1/10, more than one. So you have wheel spin for 1/10 of a second. This is a little bit of you know lap time that you're losing. Obviously, you are gaining somewhere else, but this is an indication that your your suspension is very stiff for at least this point of the circuit, and maybe you need to find some kind of compromise. All right. And also gives you an indication that the car is going to be bouncy, jumpy, and skittish, and maybe you need to control it. And let's see at the driver tab what we're doing with the steering wheel. So where are we? Let's see if I can. Yeah, you can see here, okay, how I'm getting away from this situation here. Okay, this is the steering wheel. Again, the red one is the stiff setup. And you can see the white one, how smooth it is. The white one is smooth, and at some point, I just, straight the steering wheel and move on to the straight. So I'm just keep turning, 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 turning. Here, you can see that. Turning, turning, turning. Let's move this one out. So soft setup, white graph, turning, keep the steering wheel like this, stable, turning, 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 realign, a tiny bit of control here, that is exactly this place, and straight. Now, red line is the very stiff setup. Turning, control, you see, I have to turn less, move the steering wheel straight, turn again. All this means that I'm working the steering wheel, means that I'm doing corrections. Means again here I have a little bit of oversteer, counter steering here, turn again, move back. You see, all this thing is called feedback. Now, there are two kinds of feedback. If the feedback, this is a very good hint that I've learned into an amazing uh, book that is unavailable. Maybe you can find it, used, but usually costs quite a bit of money. So when you're doing this kind of, let's sorry about that. Let's filter a little bit. One sample again, so it's nice and smooth. So when you're doing this kind of movements with the steering wheel here, you see, here's the situation. If the movement is less than 2/10 of a second, 2/10 of a second, this is called driver feedback. It means that probably it wasn't even necessary, but the driver does it because it feels more safe or because it thinks that it might be useful, but mainly it doesn't affect the car. So if your move here is less than 2/10 of a second, okay, this distance here, then it's called driver feedback, and the telemetries can ignore it. Doesn't matter. But if the feedback here, as it is here, you can see it's almost half a second or more than half. It's half a second here, okay, because it's half from here and half from here. You can see here at the bottom. So here we have a feedback of half a second, and we have a feedback too also here. You see from here to here again. This is another half a second. This is handling issue. This is feedback that the driver gives to control the car, because if it doesn't give that kind of feedback, then the car will slide away. So if you see the telemetry in the steering wheel, um, a peak of movement that goes up and down, and it is less than 2/10 of a second, that's you can ignore that. That's you driving, giving feedback, feeling the car. Okay. But if it's more than 2/10 of a second, and in this case it is almost half a second everywhere, this is a handling issue. Now, um, the handling issue, you know, sometimes you can work with it and make it better for the driver. And it's always better to, giving him a car that he can handle without being, working like crazy or having fear to do things. Or if the driver tells you, you know what, it doesn't matter because everywhere else I'm much faster and I like it. In that particular turn, for whatever reasons, I need to give feedback. So, but I can handle it. Doesn't matter. So if it does it just in one place, you know, and you feel comfortable, you can ignore it. If you do it in other places too, then that is an indication that the car is too skittish. And since we're talking about dampers right here, it's an indication that the damping is way too stiff and the car jumps around, and you have to be, extremely reactive to control the car. Sometimes you can make it, sometimes you will spin because you're not capable enough. But the fact is that your car is making you work way too hard. You know, so that's a clear indication that you're losing time, you are working way too hard, and you have to do something in the setup and maybe find a different compromise with your driving style. Uh, okay, so look at this, for example. This, the white graph now, is the aggressive setup. So in the aggressive setup, we have again some control of the car. You see, okay, we have some control of the car, goes a little bit up and down, but it's much shorter. You see here, it's so much shorter than here. So this is driver feedback, and you can handle it, and generally the steering input is better. So as a result, our conclusion is that the aggressive setup damping values is a better compromise than the stiffer setup damping values. You can play with it and go, closer to the because for example, I did like the improved precision, so I could make the car stiffer and see up to what kind of stiffness I can arrive and still have a car that handles well and gives me a better precision, so I can get faster, or maybe I go outside that and I cannot handle the car anymore.